Hello, everyone. Welcome. There's a lot going on today, as usual. In addition to the fact that we have to talk about the latest breaking news on Epstein, because there are some developments today and yesterday evening that are actually quite significant. We also have to talk about Trump wandering around on the roof of the White House yesterday like he didn't know where he was, and a bunch of other things that continue to shock and bother. So welcome. It's Resistance Live. Today's the 6th of August, 2025. I am Elizabeth Cronise McLaughlin. For those of you who haven't been here before, I'm an ex-Wall Street lawyer, human rights lawyer, lifelong activist. And for the last 15 years, I've worked with people who are here trying to really make a difference in the world by growing their impact and their leadership for positive change consistent with progressive values. I'm coming to you today, as always, from occupied Muncie, Lenape, and Mohican land. And today, for our visually challenged viewers, I'm wearing a black top with a black blazer over top. I'm in my office in front of my bookshelf and my yellow utility cart, and I'm a pink-skinned, green-eyed, dirty, blonde-haired woman, and my hair is pulled back today. Okay, so very strange things happening on the Epstein front. There's two developing stories this morning that folks should be aware of. The first is that what essentially sounds very much like an emergency meeting has been called with J.D. Vance, so like the vice president, completely bizarre, Todd Blanche, Pam Bondi, Kash Patel, and others in senior leadership at the DOJ and the FBI concerning the administration's response to Epstein. Now, I have to remind you all that there's no doubt at this point that this is a cover-up. And again, I'm going to also remind you all that this scandal and the failure to disclose the Epstein files has now been ongoing for more than a month. For everybody who's like Teflon Don, this is not that. This is a story that simply isn't going away. And one of the things that clearly has caused this emergency meeting to take place is the fact that it has spun wildly out of Trump's control. It continues to decimate the base. There was an interview overnight where an anonymous source who was referred to as, a Trump super supporter in the podcasting space said, essentially, we don't know what's in these files, but whatever it is, it's really obviously terrible, something that I've been saying again here for like the last month, or they wouldn't be going to such lengths to avoid disclosing it. We talked yesterday about the idea that that Blanche could or is rumored to be considering releasing the transcript of his meeting with Ghislaine Maxwell, which, by the way, I would just remind you all may tell us nothing, because for all we know, Blanche asked about nobody other than Democrats. Now, on top of it, subpoenas are apparently being issued for the Clintons to testify in front of a House investigatory committee about Epstein. This is yet another attempt to distract. And again, I have to point out, somebody asked me yesterday and said something. Somebody asked me yesterday on the Patreon feed something along the lines of, this seems like it's fading. No, it absolutely does not. It seems like they are simply grasping at straws to try to find a way to make this go away, and it's not going away. On top of that, the press is not letting go of it. If you happen to miss the reporting in the New York Times this morning, the New York Times ran a really quite creepy expose about the inside of Epstein's mansion in New York City, complete with photographs. One of the things that was the most disturbing about it was something that's referred to as a sculpture. I have a hard time thinking about it that way in this context, which is essentially a life-sized black girl in a wedding outfit hanging from a rope, like clinging to a rope, that hung from the ceiling of the entry-level double-story staircase inside Epstein's mansion. Like, literally, you couldn't walk in the front door without going like, wow, that's weird. And, like a very, very disturbing image. Then on top of that, one of the things that is very apparent from the photographs that came out of his house is that there were cameras in every room. Now, we know already that something like 11,000 pieces of video and photographic material were seized from his mansion during the FBI investigation. Those are contained in the files. So there's a lot of suspicion about what is actually contained on videotape. But as the New York Times disclosed this morning, if you look at the images of Epstein's bedroom, you look at the images of Epstein's office, you look at the images of various places inside this mansion, there's video cameras in the upper corners of all of those rooms. And so, again, We don't know what is in the Epstein files concerning Donald Trump at this point, but there is a strong possibility, I would suggest at this point, that whatever's in there is profoundly damning. So again, there is no dissipation of attention on this issue. And I'm really curious to see what the latest cover-up strategy is going to be coming out of this meeting. Because again, I'm going to remind you, they're trying desperately to control the narrative and they're failing at it. Partially because they've conditioned their base over the last 10 years to think that Trump was going to drain the swamp, release the Epstein files, and they were going to find out everybody who was in it. And now it looks to a huge percentage of his base and most of the Trump podcasting ecosphere that Trump himself is covering up his own involvement. So we have to keep our eyes on this one, obviously. Again, I'm going to issue a word of caution here that while we want the files released, we do want the names and identities of victims redacted to protect them. Many of the victims themselves have said as much, because they don't know what photographs are contained in the files. And at the same time, I think it is really important that we continue to call for the files to be released. This is a really easy phone call to your senator or your congressperson, right? What are they doing to try to get the files released? And there are a few Democrats who are very actively calling for the files to be released, but they're kind of few and far between. So we need a lot more of that at this point, and it's an easy ask. Okay. We have to talk today about the wandering around on the roof thing. So if you happened to miss it yesterday, Donald Trump went for a stroll on the roof of the White House. And while he was up there, in addition to making very strange hand gestures, he seemingly tried to respond to questions from press corps that were on the ground. And again, a lot of it sounded just like gibberish. And nobody's kind of asking the question of what was he doing up there? Why was he wandering around on the roof? Doesn't this look kind of particularly weird that he's up on the roof, apparently making comments about nuclear weapons? And then on top of it, we've had a number of instances in the last couple of days where once again, his dementia appears to be on display. He completely forgot Kristi Noem's name yesterday, referred to her as an entirely different person. So, we have evidence here as well, which I just want to kind of reiterate, because again, I know sometimes it can feel overwhelming, the bad news that's coming out, that he's really not with it these days. And on top of it, that what's happening with the Epstein scandal is really taking its toll. If you haven't looked at him lately, by the way, he looks deeply unwell. He doesn't look like a healthy person. So, again, I have to remind everybody that there's a real need right now to kind of stay focused on continuing to move the needle, to do the good work in your own community, to mobilize nationally where you're able to do that kind of work. Because keep in mind that, again, we don't know how the dominoes are going to fall here. There's a lot of moving pieces right now that are really not good for Trump. That includes, by the way, as we discussed yesterday, the firing of the head of the Bureau of Labor Statistics, which has really significant implications for the administration. This morning, Stanford sued the Trump administration, or rather the Stanford student newspaper sued the Trump administration on the grounds that their actions against the university were suppressing free speech. There's a variety of things continuing to happen that are pushing against the idea that all is well for him. And those of you who have been here for a while know that there is a serious potential growing every day that this is going to end in a manner that is really not good for Trump, and that his narcissism and his acting out and oddity is a direct result of that looming narcissistic injury. So we have to stay tuned to all of that. I will also just say that, obviously notwithstanding the fact that I'm wildly disappointed in the Democratic Party, like many of you are on a regular basis, we have seen Chuck Schumer take action, for instance, in the Homeland Security Committee to, under something called the Rule of Five, to move for the disclosure of the Epstein files. So that is something, by the way, that invokes an ancient rule of order in the Senate, but it's that kind of stuff that we need on a regular basis. And so keeping up the public pressure on this issue really does make a difference. And I think it's very important for folks to remember that the more this issue sticks and the more the disclosures grow and the weirder it gets and the more obvious the cover up, the more likely it is that dominoes could fall in a certain direction. I have said here many times before, and I will just repeat it, I would not be surprised at this point to see a looming resignation on medical grounds at some point if this continues to escalate in the way that it is. We will have to see how it plays out. But, reminder, people who are suffering narcissistic collapse become non-functional. And narcissistic collapse resulting from a massive narcissistic injury like this is not out of the realm of possibility. So we will have to see how that plays out. Okay. This morning in Los Angeles, we had a direct violation of the now affirmed court order. The Ninth Circuit affirmed this last week, that prohibits the use of racial profiling by ICE in arrest and detention, meaning that they cannot troll the streets of Los Angeles saying, you're a brown person, I demand to see your papers, and detaining people without cause, okay, and without due process. So this morning, and I have to say that one of the things that I find particularly disturbing about it is that it is really reminiscent of the actions by Patriot Front when they roll into a town in the back of a U-Haul. This morning at a Home Depot in Los Angeles, a group of ICE officials rolled up in the back of a Penske truck. And just they shot one of their propaganda videos again, rolled up the door, hopped out at the Home Depot, and started rounding up brown people who were there seeking work. This, by the way, is a direct violation of the court's order. It very much appears to be. And I would not be surprised to see some form of a contempt motion in order to show cause being filed in the court that initially issued this order, like today. Because what they did is hop out without any probable cause, no specific person identified, and literally started trying to round people up. Now, there is a lot of speculation this morning about why the Penske truck. So one of the things that has been made difficult by citizen response and bystander intervention is that vehicles are being videotaped by average everyday citizens who have been trained in bystander intervention as those unmarked vehicles roll up and roll out with kidnap victims. One of the things that is suspected is that they're now using Penske rental trucks so that private vehicles cannot be tracked. Okay. Again, very problematic behavior, definitely an escalation. Not sure it's going to fly in front of the court that already barred this kind of activity in Los Angeles proper. So we will have to see exactly how this plays out. But again, I have to remind you, when this happened, I was like, well, that's what Patriot Front does. The far right white supremacist group that rolls into town, marches down a street in their khakis and button-down shirts with their faces covered with white masks. Gators. And, it's like that. It's like they're taking instructions from those folks. So again, not a good thing. There is, however, a strange bit of breaking news this morning with regard to ICE that bodes somewhat well, I think, in a weird sort of way. So people who were employed by FEMA, who have been on administrative leave under this administration, have received a notice now, or some of them at least, have received a notice saying that they have to report to work for ICE within the next 7 days or lose their jobs. What this tells me, and we've talked about this before on the broadcast, is that ICE is having very serious trouble recruiting people to carry out their fascist agenda. We've spoken many, many times here before about the fact that they simply don't have the manpower to do the mass deportations that they're seeking to enact. This is one reason, by the way, why Bondi has reallocated law enforcement from the DEA and the FBI and the ATF, right? Because they don't have enough personnel to do this. And, just last week, Stephen Miller was posting on X about you can come work for us and we'll forgive your student loans. They're clearly desperate for manpower because they can't actually do what they're claiming that they want to do. So ordering completely unrelated folks in a completely different agency to show up to work for ICE, by the way, I don't think that's going to work, is yet another sign that they're struggling. So we've spoken here before about the importance of understanding how to not just do bystander intervention, because you really need to get trained for that. I want to make this really clear. If you are somebody who wants to be prepared to, for instance, videotape when ICE drops into your neighborhood and starts kidnapping people, you need to do a bystander intervention training. You can actually make it worse for the people who are being targeted if you don't know what you're doing. All right. Very important to get trained. But the other thing to keep in mind here is that the vocal outrage about ICE kidnapping people is absolutely having an effect on their ability to recruit, right? Lots of people don't want to go into a line of work that requires them to arrest their friends and neighbors. And that's true, by the way, even of people who at one point may have seen value in working for like the Border Patrol or working for ICE. Now, in this era, when, they're literally rounding up just hardworking people, right? Again, Trump promised they would go after criminals, quote unquote, like the worst of the worst. And now what they're doing is they're picking up people who are like painters and construction workers and restaurant workers and like, grandmas. So again, the importance of speaking out and, sharing the videos that are around from people practicing bystander intervention with training is continues to be very important. And also please remember that those recruitment opportunities, I mean, this has already happened in California and elsewhere, as we talked about last week. Those recruitment opportunities are also an opportunity for protest. Because if there is a recruitment event happening near you and you show up with signs about how, ICE is the new Nazi party, for instance, or the new secret police, the new Stasi, that has an impact on people who are showing up potentially to get a job. So I do really think that it's critically important right now for people to remember that the way we're using our voices is having an impact and actually can stop the worst of the worst from coming to pass. Because if they don't have people to carry out the agenda it won't be carried out, right? And it's really bad already, but it feels very much like there's a tipping point happening right now where they simply don't have the manpower to go further. And we need to kind of keep that in check in the context of the work that we're all doing. Okay. Somebody asked a question this morning. Well, actually, before we get to that, let me talk for a second about one very strange thing that has happened this morning on the official US government website, which is that two portions of the Constitution have been erased. I'm only laughing because it's so frickin' 1984, you guys. It's kind of hard to fathom that they thought they would get away with this. Okay, so they have erased from the official US government website two clauses of the Constitution. The clause that says that it is unlawful, that you can never suspend the right of habeas corpus, and the part of the Constitution that says there's no such thing as an ex post facto law. So let me explain these two things. We've talked about habeas corpus here a lot on this broadcast over the last 8.5 years. Habeas corpus is what allows someone to petition a federal court to cause a government official to do or not do something. Habeas corpus, in this context, is being used, for instance, by people who are detained at CCOT or were detained at CCOT, now they've been released to Venezuela, to petition the court in the District Court of the District of Columbia for their own release, to petition the U.S. government to release them, okay? That is one primary way that habeas corpus is usually used by prisoners who are seeking release, seeking to force an official to release them, to overturn a conviction and the like, okay? So they've removed from the official U.S. government website the portion of the Constitution that says you're not allowed to stop habeas corpus, okay? Again, not a very good sign. In addition to that, they've removed the clause about ex post facto laws. So a little bit of legal education here for you all. Ex post facto laws, essentially there's a principle in the law that says that laws that are new cannot be applied ex post facto. That means that if you committed a crime yesterday that was legal yesterday, and today the state or the federal government passes a law that says that conduct's illegal, you cannot be held liable because the law cannot be applied backwards, okay? An ex post facto law is a law that is applied to prior conduct. And the idea behind this, for policy reasons, is that how could you know if the conduct wasn't illegal, that you were committing a crime, if it wasn't illegal when you committed it, but it's illegal now, okay? So generally speaking, there is a prohibition in the Constitution against the application of ex post facto laws. Now, why would you delete that from the US government website? Well, if you were going to try to claim that something that wasn't illegal before is now a crime. I'm going to remind you all, by the way, that being in the United States as an undocumented citizen is not a crime. It's a civil violation. It's like a parking ticket. Okay, it's not a crime to be in the United States undocumented. And I have questions. One of the things that came to mind when I saw this morning was that while ordinarily, for very good reasons, under our Constitution, you can't pass a law that says being in the United States not illegally, as an undocumented person is a crime, because it's not. You can't pass a law that says that and apply that to people who are already here as a civil violation, okay? But if, for instance, you wanted to pass a law that said it's a crime to be in the United States and therefore we get to incarcerate you without due process, and you want to apply that to literally everybody who's in the United States on undocumented status, one way that you would do that would be to try to override the ex post facto clause of the Constitution. So, very concerning. I don't want to claim it's not very concerning. We also have some reports, by the way, this morning that some big law firms, again, for those of you who are not lawyers, the term big law generally applies to about the top 20 law firms in the country. I used to work for one of them that has now dissolved, but had been around since the 1850s. There are some reports this morning that big law is now turning down clients that would have cases challenging the Trump administration for fear of retribution, including FBI agents who were fired for their participation in the January 6th investigations. That also not a great sign, because everybody's entitled to legal representation, and those folks are now not going to be represented by some of the best lawyers in the country. Very concerning. Okay, so these are warning bells that are kind of going off. All right. This morning on the Patreon feed, reminder, if you want to ask me questions and have me answer them in writing or on the air on this broadcast, you can join our Patreon subscriber page at patreon.com/resistancelive, and you will get access to bonus broadcasts. You'll get to ask me questions, and you get other really cool perks. This morning on the Patreon page, somebody asked me a question about Democratic electeds. And the idea behind it was, I'm summarizing here, but deep disappointment in Whitmer, who again was in DC yesterday, apparently kissing up to Trump because of something that she wanted for the state. Deep disappointment in Alyssa Slotkin, who is calling Trump's election apparently a mandate. I didn't see that reporting, but this is what somebody said in the question that they asked me. And what are we supposed to do if our Democratic electeds aren't doing their jobs? How can we possibly resist if the Democratic electeds aren't doing their jobs? So this is a really important question, because I think for many folks, there is this kind of inherent belief that we are powerless and our elected officials are supposed to be fighting back, okay? One of the things that I've been talking about here for a very, very, very long time is that the American people actually have to recognize that we have tremendous power when we organize together. There's way more of us than there are of the people currently running the regime, or even their base, which is a tiny fraction of the actual US voting base. I'm going to remind you, 90 million people did not vote in the last election. Okay. When you add everybody together, the base that Trump has is 23, 25%. Not huge. Not huge. There's way more people who oppose what he's doing than people who are in his camp. And right now, because of everything happening with Epstein, those numbers are dropping anyway. I'm going to remind you all of the polling that we saw yesterday, that more than 80% of everyone in this country, regardless of political affiliation, wants those files released. 83% of registered Republicans. Crazy, right? So one of the things that we have to keep in mind here is that when our electeds let us down, some officials inside the Democratic Party really are letting us down right now, that's not the end of the story, right? In fact, it's only one component of the way in which we can organize now. I've been talking about dual power here for many years, right? Dual power is the concept that when institutions crumble, we in our own local communities can create alternative structures of support, okay? You want to fight back against this regime? Start figuring out how to keep people safe where you live. That means giving them food security, making sure that they're housed, making sure that immigrants are protected and safe and have access to legal services, making sure that LGBTQ people and particularly trans kids have safe spaces that they can go to, urging your legislature to pass sanctuary state laws. There's one pending here in New Jersey right now that's really important, right? Getting involved with bystander intervention and rapid response teams for ICE. Getting involved in abortion rights work if you live in a state where abortion is banned. There's so many ways in which we can be a part of the solution right now that actually really deeply moves the needle. And the thing that's really important about this is that if you do that work around the clock, yes, you should take rest breaks, but if you do that work year round, let's put it that way, then not everything is dependent on the next election. Why? Because here's a real key feature about voter mobilization and turnout, okay? People show up to vote because people they trust tell them why it matters, right? People show up to vote even if they've sort of thought that their vote was insignificant, because people that they're in relationship with explain to them why it matters. You can't just show up and do like voter mobilization 2 months before an election. What you have to be doing is organizing year-round in ways that support and build community, because it's by building those relationships of trust that you grow voter turnout, okay? So the key thing that I want people to remember here is that while it feels like a lot of things are crumbling right now, right? It's like the United States is the tower card from Tarot incarnate. That doesn't mean that there's not huge opportunities for change. And it doesn't mean that there's not huge power that lies in our own hands, right? If you can start thinking about it in the context of like building out an enormous web of community organizers and organizations around the country, this starts to make sense. Because if you are in community with the people where you live and you are a trusted voice in that community for change and safety and protection, when the time comes to mobilize for like, you know, a general strike or the next election, or to support a progressive candidate who really should be elected in the face of and against like an old school Dem who's kind of carrying water for the Trump administration, how will that happen? By all of those community organizations being mobilized at once. So again, you have to start re-envisioning how all of this can work. And the most important thing is to not fall prey to the idea of powerlessness. Okay, so Governor Whitmer isn't doing what you like. What are your options? You have like hundreds of them, right? You can start doing work for the Working Families Party, right? Which is mobilizing in every community around the United States right now to elect progressive candidates, okay? You can do work in the state of Wisconsin that benefits people who are marginalized and hurting, okay, of all identities. You can do work in your own local community to support progressive candidates to get elected to like state and local office, because that provides a counterbalance to what Governor Whitmer is doing, right? You can also do work going forward for members of the House of Representatives, because we're going to need to flip the House if we want accountability for the Trump administration going forward, period, right? And that's on top of all the things that you can do to like make sure people where you live know that you are a trusted voice they can rely on. So it's critically important right now to do the work where you live. And this is the thing that, you know, I struggle with day in and day out, including with some of our clients, okay? This work is not sexy, okay? The thing about effective community organizing is it's not the kind of shit that you can post on social media with like your fabulous poster that you designed all night. It's way more important than that right now, though. And, you know, it doesn't mean protest is ineffective or that protest doesn't matter or it's not good for morale or that it doesn't show that people disagree with what's happening, okay? But the real work that creates relationships of trust that can then be mobilized to move the needle is in those quiet back rooms and those community kitchens and in those mutual aid networks and those organizations that are benefiting marginalized people, in those relationships being built everywhere nationwide, okay? That's where the work really lies. And if you want to move the needle, that's what you have to do. And you have to honestly stop, I hate to put it in these terms, stop expecting old school Democrats to do the right thing, okay? They've already shown their stripes here in many, 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 many instances, right? Like, you know, Governor Whitmer knows she's not on the right side of things when she covers her face in the Oval Office. And that doesn't mean that she's then going to be mobilized by shame to stop showing up in DC to kiss Trump's ass. So in the face of that, she has shown us who she is in this era. It's deeply unfortunate because I used to be a huge fan of hers. But all that said, in the face of that, what are you going to do? You're not going to give up. I hope you're not going to give up. Instead, we have to flip the script, which is that, okay, they're not doing their jobs. What's mine? What role do I have to play in how the country comes back from this? What role do I have to play in building the future that I want to see? And how am I going to commit to doing that work where I live on the ground so that people know that I am a person who can be relied upon to be a part of the solution? Okay. And again, for some folks, this is too much, right? It either doesn't give folks like the social media credibility that they want, or it feels like it's hard work. It is hard work. Like, this is one of the secrets about all of this, right? The work of changing the nation is hard work. And part of the point here is that if we all do it together and we stay focused on the power that actually lies in the hands of the people, the work becomes a lot easier. Okay. So critically important to get deeply into community with others who are doing change making work right now. Like, I can't emphasize this enough. There are good people on the ground in every community in this country, every community, even the reddest of red communities. There are people who are working at food banks and at housing shelters. There are people working at local libraries. These are people who really actually give a shit. And it's critically important to get in community with folks like that, because again, there is that famous quote that it only takes a handful of concerned citizens to change the world. 3% is the famous statistic that is cited to overthrow whole authoritarian governments. Like, you can either expect Democrats who have shown themselves to not be willing to do it, to change their stripes, or you can start becoming a part of the solution yourself. And, you know, I know those two things aren't mutually exclusive, but I do think it's really important to remember that, like, all hope is not lost. And resistance has never, by the way, fallen to the hands of elected officials. I mean, if it did, all of France would still be under Nazi rule, right? Because, like, the Vichy French government would have been the site that everybody was expecting to resist the Nazis, and the whole underground resistance movement in France would have died. So again, just like critically important to focus on how you can make a difference and be a part of the solution, right? Instead of expecting them to do it for us. And yes, you can advocate. Yes, you can call your reps. Yes, we should try to get more progressives elected to office. You know, there's plenty of folks, younger folks particularly, running around the country on democratic socialist platforms. It's critically important to support those people. And at the same time, it's also important to take responsibility for what you yourself can change, because it's way more than what many of us think. All right, that's my little pep talk of the day. Reminder, we are on vacation next week, so there will be no live broadcast next week at all. There will be a new educational video coming out on Monday, which actually profiles one of our members of the Ripple Effect Institute who went from being a corporate lawyer to feeding his whole community. This is a story you're not going to want to miss. It's really good, terribly inspiring, fits right into everything that I've just been talking about the way in which one person or a handful of people can make a massive difference. So that's coming up on Monday. But there will be no live broadcast next week because I'm taking some time off, as we always do every summer, to hang out with my kids and to give my staff a break. Please give a thumbs up on this broadcast. Don't forget to subscribe. Please make sure that you drop me a comment if you're watching on the replay, so that the algorithm knows you like what we're doing here. And also, please remember that you can download our free guide on how you yourself can make a difference right now, particularly without burning out. It's already linked in the show notes. I will drop it into the comments. All right. Lots of love, everybody. I will be here live tomorrow and Friday, of course, and I hope to see you then. All right. Hang in there, everybody, and keep up the good work. All right. Bye.